Kind greetings and well, it is a pleasure for me to be able to present this work, which basically exposes what are the needs of the future, corresponding to renewable energies for Latin America, considering a horizon for the year 2100, depending on the development of technology, depending on the needs that the community of the society of the region needs, and also depending on what may be the real achievements that we can obtain to be able to cover each of the requirements and needs that we are going to have in the future. In that sense, we are going to make a presentation of what the current conditions are and where the future can be reached, what the benefits may be, what the technologies that can be developed in a better way here for several Latin American countries, obviously considering that the current development is quite insignificant, in the sense that we have not yet been able to cover energy gaps, and even worse, to use current technology within renewable energies that allows us to obtain perhaps a resource or an advance towards new alternatives or new processes to have energy sovereignty in each of the countries that make up Latin America. In a way, we can say directly that, currently in Latin America, hydropower is the main source of electricity generation that we have in the vast majority of countries, and represents approximately 45% of the total electricity supply of the region. That's because obviously we have a quite high mountain ranges that allow us a current generation of energy that we are obviously taking advantage of. In countries such as Ecuador, for example, we are approaching more than 90% of current energy production based on hydroelectric generation. However, these problems, thinking ahead to the year 2100, are obviously going to increase the possibility or the need for energy generation from other renewable energy sources. In that sense, hydroelectric generation is considered to reach a certain peak point or an inflection point at which production begins to decline due to the years of construction of each of the dams, and obviously due to the cost of generation. This hydroelectric generation will probably continue to grow. It helps us to reduce carbon emissions. But we must also consider these very important aspects, as well as the climate changes that are posed in the future. The challenge of a better generation of hydroelectric energy for Latin America. Based on that, we must consider that climate change also increases rainfall patterns, for example, the melting of glaciers and obviously the increasing occurrence of extreme weather events that we are currently experiencing, and that are probably going to continue increasing as an El Niño phenomenon, large droughts that affect many countries, especially cities on the Pacific coast, and that mainly have repercussions, generating a reduction in energy production from the hydroelectric point of view. For the year we are seeing now, they expect, for example, droughts and possible new energy costs, which can obviously affect the growth of each of the countries in the region. And if we think about the future, a much stricter control will have to be done if we want to take advantage of this type of energy generation in a better way.
Otro criterio importante debemos considerarlo futuro es que el factor de capacidad media en toda la región durante el periodo comprendido entre el 2020 y el 2060 aproximadamente va posiblemente a disminuir en un 8% en promedio, ¿no? Y esto principalmente tiene que ver con un escenario en el cual también se vaya a considerar un aumento de temperatura por efecto de los gases de efecto invernadero, el cambio climático que habíamos hablado hace un momento, en el cual, bueno, se consideran que pueden estar aumentando cada uno de sus niveles entre 2 grados y 4 grados. Esto principalmente tiene que considerarse en el aspecto principal de que cada uno de sus eventos, pues, a futuro pueden ser bastante contradictorios o difíciles de recuperar, ¿no?
And after that we will have to consider that greenhouse gases are possibly going to have the greatest action in Latin America. They are going to have much more negative impacts on hydropower generation, mainly because to increase this hydropower generation in these countries, we are going to have to sacrifice many aspects that currently help us to improve environmental stability, such as the floods are going to increase, perhaps because of certain effects of the hydroelectric dams in certain sectors. For example, the Ecuadorian jungle, the Brazilian jungle are going to be eliminated by maintaining an electric generation that can be sustained. In exchange for it, obviously the environmental impacts are going to be very, very visible in the future. Here in this table, which is referenced from the International Energy Agency, shows us on a horizon based up to 2100 on the right side, what the hydroelectric capacity that Latin America is going to have is going to be, and we can observe that by the end of the year, between the years 2060 and 2100, a decline of these resources and these sources is probably going to begin. We are probably going to maintain some scenarios that allow us to maintain some values, but if the temperature continues to rise, obviously it will have an impact on the decline of this energy generation. That is why it is very important to try to consider the conditions that we are going to have based on pollution, to know if that pollution and that climate change is going to affect mainly at the generation level, or in the percentages of hydroelectric generation that we may have. In addition to that, many policies must be considered, many aspects that must be very crucial at the political level, at the level of Latin American governments, and that we must consider from now on if we want to achieve stability. We also consider the same fact that not only hydroelectric energy is going to be generated, they are also potential, the generations mainly in the solar and wind area. Several countries in the region already have certain generation plants implemented, but obviously the generation is going to be very critical in that sense, plus the new energy systems that we are going to give next. Within these recommendations that I had told them, they will mainly be looking at how governments can contribute to improving the climate resilience of hydropower generation. Incorporating, for example, energy policies, mobilizing investments for the modernization of plants and power plants that are obsolete or are going to be obsolete in the coming years, building and strengthening insurance against climate risks, and that is a very important point that is already being considered around the world, and Latin America obviously cannot be the exception. Why? Because the climate impacts are going to be felt in a much stronger way here due to the lack of resources and care we have for the conditions of it. There is a very important point that has to do with academia and with linking with governments, which has to do directly with supporting scientific research to increase the accuracy of climate predictions. As an academy, as a university, we are bound to be able to cover each of those parts that help us to have a much closer reality, to know what are really the affectations that we are going to have, the changes, the temperature increases, the decrease of ions, for example. Obviously all that has to do also with the amount of direct, diffuse radiation and the shelter it can have. Also to see the potential and the development of photovoltaic energy in the region. Generally speaking, everyone is expected in the future by the year 2100. Emerging economies will present the largest share of global electricity demand growth in the coming decades, and Latin America is no exception, because the average growth rate is projected at about 2% until 2040, and from there it will continue to increase the percentage close to 3.5, until reaching the year 2100. This is quite important to consider because obviously the increase in population obviously increases the energy consumption of each of the countries, and there comes the need to have new sources of generation. Another very important point is obviously to generate economic growth. If we do not have economic growth like other Latin American countries, we will be able to do very little to implement new clean electricity generation technologies. This access to energy services should also be guaranteed to the entire community, because this implies an improvement in the control of climate crises, and is a very crucial point within energy generation. It is also to make an adequate control of energy through energy advocacy, policies that can be implemented and that must be focused and must be present throughout the scenario. Process of control in generation. In this graph we can also see what the production can be, the growth of electricity demand in Latin America. This is analyzed for the year 2040 and where mainly there are some quite interesting values, although it can be considered that there is a high demand for electricity generation without considering efficiency solutions, but at the same time we can identify that there are some key elements that serve in generation such as heavy industry. The heating and air conditioning that is also in each of the homes and buildings are going to continue to increase, and we really have a generation or increase process that is going to be considered the growth of clean energies, which if it is growing or is growing is going to have a really interesting and sustained moment. We're still going to miss it. It is estimated that obviously we will not be able to cover the need. Typically, if we could reach 50 or 60% of energy coverage of the entire region based on clean energies, then it will be a success, because obviously the need for fuel consumption is still going to be maintained as an outdated technology, but it will still be necessary due to the lack of economic resources. However, despite this, we also have to migrate effectively towards other types of energy generation resources that we may have in the following years, such as the hydrogen boost that in many first world countries are already a fundamental part of energy development. Here in Latin America we have a certain potential for growth, which is going to allow in some way of exploitation, but obviously buying technology. The idea is that we can have long-term hydrogen use strategies through Project Castorus, and additionally a very key point is going to be the issue of what is going to be the storage capacity and hydrogen-based energy that Latin America is going to be able to have. In that sense, the countries of the area are already working on projects to start being implemented from the year 2035 in the future, in which hydrogen strips are going to be very necessary to be able to store even energy that comes also from a hybrid way as other energy efficiency alternatives, such as electric, solar, wind, tidal in some countries that is not even implemented yet, and also other criteria such as biomass. This obviously low-carbon hydrogen has a high development potential. We are showing this. We are already seeing it in other countries of the world. Because it intends to be able to reduce pollution levels, greenhouse gas emissions, and also the possibility of creating new business opportunities. Where does it have to take us? It is logical that to have a better economic growth in our region, to have new business opportunities, new opportunities for people to be able to effectively search and have that impact with the new technologies that we are really going to require them, but that medium and long term to also see them applied with scientific and technological development, if we want it to have stability and to have growth, and in turn that allows us to grow economically. Implementing hydrogen in Latin America is going to be a complex challenge, in principle due to the cost that hydrogen-based generation technology still has, and partly also because hydrogen is produced from renewable electricity, and that is going to be quite difficult for Latin America to be considered during all these years, because almost all Latin American countries bordering the oceans have the potential for gas and natural gas generation. And what does this allow? Well, it is currently one of the strongest or most indispensable sources of economic income for each of the countries. This obviously makes it very complex that we can start hydrogen technology and stop producing gas, even knowing that suddenly gas is a type of fossil fuel. But nevertheless, Latin America has the deficiency that it cannot generate new economic resources based on hydrogen, because we would have to spend too much on technology and innovation. It is going to be a very complex issue, which obviously has to be viable from every point of view, but which in turn will have to be analyzed in a very interesting way. The next decade is going to be crucial from here, analyzing about 2040, possibly between the 20s and 30s. You are going to be crucial because we will need to secure and promote low-carbon hydrogen in Latin America in the long term. Otherwise we are going to stay, because we are going to have the technology, but we are not going to have accounts. It makes that sense. The prospecting stage, the search to find alternatives of more efficient places for energy generation from hydrogen are going to be key. Studies are already being made that they can possibly be implemented in the same hydroelectric plants, which allow making a hybrid system and can also be used to generate hydrogen, obviously to generate energy. This painting, it shows what the inflections of the demand for hydrogen in Latin America can be, for an analysis since the year 2030, and we can see that there are some areas where the need for hydrogen is going to be very intense, mainly in regions and industrial sectors. We can see that until the year 2030 approximately, the main uses that it will have, or the current uses that it has, will be mainly related in the area of metal, mechanics, or in the area of refinery production as well, which are the ones that are currently being handled, but there are going to be new ones for future uses, such as the transport area, which is a key point here in Latin America that has not yet started working on it. We are barely in electromobility, but we are not directly using hydrogen strips. Another is obviously the issue in the area of metal, the industrial area, and also the area of cement. That can be a very vital or very interesting point that could have use from the point of view of this new energy. This week in 2020 in accelerated cases, sources, but we are sure that they are going to the new technologies, mainly focused on the area of transport, in the area of tourism, which are going to be key for production and for the improvement of the quality of life of all the people of the region, and that also implies in terms of improving the quality of life that they can increase, even grow economically each of these areas, taking advantage of these resources that are obviously just entering throughout Latin America. An interesting point is also to boost efficiency in Latin America. Although we have the capacity and the potential to generate renewable energies throughout Latin America for the following years, for the following decades, a very important point that has to be analyzed is the continuous issue of energy deficiency. That's something we're doing in a way very poor, where not even the parameters that are used in first world countries, we can't implement them. We don't even know them in many cases. This is a very important part that even the Academy can participate in it, because the training of each of the production areas of each of the Latin American countries must know or should know the efficiency processes that allow us to obviously reduce energy consumption, that allow us to have greater accessibility, security, new generation of jobs, and that also allow us in turn to generate a better energy transition. That is, when we start generating renewable energy on a large scale, knowing that this production is going to be well used, and that it is not going to be wasted energetically, no, it does not make much sense. So a very important part is to generate training and clear knowledge in people. And obviously the perspective of transformation of the energy system also points to a greater growth of the gross domestic product of the GDP in each of the Latin American countries, and that they consider an estimated increase of 2.4% by mid-century speaks of the year 2050 compared to the results of what is currently being done, considering that we have even passed the issue of the COVID pandemic. This civil growth seems small in theory. We have to consider that it is an average that is taking out of all Latin America, and obviously there are countries that will have a better development, but there are countries that do not have it, or that are very lagging behind and are increasingly lagging behind at the energy technology level. In that sense, obviously, as I was saying a moment ago, much of the energetic elegance is key to being able to create a substantial improvement. Economic growth is not only an investment issue, because it is an expense. Although we are going to improve production at the industrial level, we also have to make an efficient control of that energy. If not, we are not going to have a greater purpose, and obviously all of Latin America is going to have some new generation alternatives that we have not talked about. For example, geothermal plants for the use of hot water, hydroelectric plants in countries where they are not typically made, and also other additional developments such as tidal power, such as the hydrogen that we had said, and well, we are sure that new forms of energy are possibly going to appear. We are talking about a horizon of about 80 years, of which we believe that even in 30-40 years we will not be able to find a new source of generation, and that we believe that possibly Latin America can be a very interesting source that can contribute in that aspect. As a conclusion, we could say that currently 400 million people do not have access to a reliable source of electricity. This globally, of that percentage in Latin America, we are talking about that almost 30% do not have that access to a reliable source of electricity. For the 2100, we consider that more than a third of the heating of buildings could come from geothermal sources. That is, an issue that was not even encountered, but that could be a new source of alternative energy generation in the thermal area. And another also interesting criterion is that the new hydroelectric schemes must comply with certain criteria of environmental sustainability of human rights. This, based on the fact that obviously, the demographic growth of people is going to be increasingly difficult. This means that hydroelectric power plants that occupy large spaces and dams will have to be much more controlled, and possibly reach generations of mini hydroelectric plants that obviously allow the growth of a much more rational generation. And at the academic level, obviously we as an academy should strive to cover the knowledge gap of both the Latino community, as well as the training or the generation of professionals who are not only technology installers, but who allow us, through research, to develop new knowledge. It is also essential that development is effective for Latin America, so that the support we receive from first world countries is received effectively, and can last in the sense that it can create a better quality of life for everyone. I thank you for the attention to my person. There are my contacts. Please, and I am obviously ready to cover and collaborate any type of process in energy area that we have a lot of good and much need for our country. Thank you all very much and have a good day.